Welcome to the 2021 Scouting Series Draft with Toronto Ultra. The 2020 Scouting Series is essentially an opportunity for the key young amateur players to get a spotlight on them, and it allows the franchises to assess the best up-and-coming talent going forward. Overall, I think it's a very positive thing for the CDL to do. Last year we had a decent amount of support for challengers, but now this year they've really went in the deep end and really stepped up. This is almost like a kind of combine style event where you're going to have players playing with different players that they usually play with, so it's not sort of set teams like it is for the Challengers Cups. So the Scouting Series is following the first two Challengers Cups that have already taken place. So we've already seen a bunch of these players compete with their respective teams, and now it's time for us to go into it and draft players and then assess them on an individual basis, as well as how they operate in a team. And joining me on the desk here, we have Ryan Oldfield, aka Flux, who is an ex-teammate of mine, but now our assistant coach here at Toronto Ultra. He has a winning record against Scump, believe it or not, in actual matches. Player. So he knows what he's talking about, this guy. He's pretty good. Not anymore, though. He was good at the time. But now moving on, he's a really great analyst, assistant coach, all-round tall guy. Just a great, fantastic member of the team here.
Yeah, so as Mike says, my name's Ryan, also known as Flux. I used to be a pro player. I competed up until Call of Duty Ghosts. And my role really is a kind of a hybrid analyst, and now that's kind of formed into assistant coach as well. So I help the guys on the team trying to optimize their gameplay, assist Mark in any way we can when preparing for matches. And in terms of the scouting grounds, that also kind of falls under some of my area of expertise, because we are always looking for up and coming talent for the future. Obviously, we are a forward looking franchise, and we are really looking for kind of the next generation of Call of Duty players. And there's always up and coming talent in Call of Duty. It has a fine history of nurturing up and coming young talent. And I think that is going to really continue with this event and moving forward.
Nice.
That's a great point, Ryan. Fantastic stuff from you there.
Yeah, all right. I can't believe you called me the Optic Scumpy Slayer. I'm going to get flack for that.
Well, Ryan, going into the first Challengers Cup, what were you sort of expecting from the start? I mean, going from last season in Europe, I think that the X-War Singularity sort of rivalry was the one I was looking at. Singularity obviously had a lot of success at the start of the season, and War towards the end. For me, I think that it was sort of expected that those teams would be up near the end of the tournament. Going into the first one, obviously it didn't end up panning out that way with the sort of the winner. But what was your thoughts on that? And kind of going in, was that your expectation, or did you have any other sort of teams, players in your eye?
Yeah, so in terms of the European scene, I think as we saw unfold over the last year, Singularity and War were the two kind of superpowers when it came to the Europeans. And I think that was expected. Again, coming to this season, obviously Singularity adding Denza, who was previously on Team War. Also, they're currently called August. But yeah, I think those two teams definitely are two to look out for. In the first cup, they both placed top three. Obviously, House Tarth, who also had the likes of Afro, Defrag, Gizmo, PT, they obviously came out on top. But I think they they just have a lot of talent on that team, and they can compete with the likes of Team War, Singularity. I think obviously Josh, one of the stalwarts of the European community, coming back into after a coaching role at the Paris Legion. I think he's coming back into a playing role, and you expect him to kind of galvanize his teammates, and he add something to an already kind of winning dynamic. And so from the first cup, it kind of went as expected. Like, those, because of the talent on House Tarth, you'd expect them to be in the mix. And I think obviously the team that came fourth was the Spaniards in the Rams, who obviously we know what they're capable of, because we had Adrian Metals with us last season, and they've obviously added Journey from the old Atlanta FaZe Academy team. So I think, and rounding out that roster is Nvidian. So I think that kind of the top four teams was not unexpected from Cup 1 in terms of the European tournament.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there was a lot of talk going into this season in terms of what a lot of teams made changes. Obviously, Afro was originally part of that ex-war team, and he was having a really good end to the year, and they've obviously let him go elsewhere, which is sort of a questionable decision. Now, looking at how Afro's been playing, you could probably argue he's been the most sort of explosive SMG within the European, even worldwide, to be honest, out of all the sort of amateur players. So it's an interesting move. I think that that's sort of what was able to allow them to go on and win the first cup is the current meta, especially in Europe right now with smokes and whatnot. I think that it tailors to a more aggressive SMG partnership. And I think if you look across the amateur teams in Europe, I think that the Defrag Afro SMG partnership is probably the best one. Like in terms of just you've got a good combination. They're both aggressive players and both perform consistently well. Defrag I've teamed with in the past as a player, and he consistently performs well. He's not really that guy to have a bad game. To be honest, he's a fairly consistent player and can also pull out those big performances. Afro is, from what I've seen, the same thing. Uh, but yeah, I think that that's sort of what was able to allow them to go on and win the first cup. And then, like you said, I think that Josh coming back in, you expect him with X War to come into this game, especially with the way it's played. It's a more methodical, sort of smart, slower pace game in comparison to previous years. So I think that comboing him with teammates he's played with before, Vortex, obviously Dave, they had a decent amount of success in Epsilon back on Infinite Warfare and in previous years as well. So I think that they're like a good partnership. Dave is that sort of slow-paced AR that you'd expect to play well in this sort of game. He's got a really good shot, really confident, good positionally, and good comms from what I've heard. So I think that it sort of made sense why they'd be up there, especially towards they had success in the second cup, as we're going to go into in a second. But though, like you said before, I think that those teams near the top were sort of expected, and we like you touched on before, those Rams guys are really talented. I think that they are obviously lucky coming off a year of not really getting the opportunity to compete. Adrian, obviously, with us last season as well, is lucky, but Adrian obviously got a lot more play time. But I think that those guys and Rams are the ones to look out for too. I think that they are on the upward trajectory. Simply due to the fact I think that Lucky, Journey, and Metals obviously had a lot of success together in Heretics back on Black Ops 4. So I'm expecting those guys to have a lot of chemistry and build with each other. And I think that they're all more comfortable in their positions now with those guys rather than when Journey was with Atlanta FaZe last year and when Metals and Lucky were with us. I think they're all a lot more comfortable now with, those players that they've sort of grown up and grown and built into professional players alongside. So, um, yeah, and then I guess sort of going down a little bit, we've sort of just touched about the top four teams in those first cups, but there's obviously some other names there too. I think that you can look at the likes of Connect Four, which is like Madcat, Wee Man, Nolson, and Joe, all four players that have had success in the past, like top placings at international events, finals of international events, winning international events. You've got a bunch of experience and talent in that roster, so I think you would have sort of expected that team to maybe do a little better than fifth, sixth, but I think overall it's sort of went expected below that. I think you could have maybe seen them do a little better, but apart from that, as expected, really. Going into like the Cup 2, I think, which was obviously just happened before, well, not before, just happened yesterday, it's just now finished. It was similar results. It obviously this top four teams sort of moved around places, but the team of Orglis obviously went on to win it, which is the team with Josh that we spoke of before. I think that Josh is a player that learns games very fast, and obviously they didn't win the first one, but I think that going into this second cup, they were always looking like a strong team. We got a opportunity to play some of the other teams around that level, like Obtained Esports and Team Singularity, with over the last week when we had some scrims. So sort of seeing how those teams played, I felt very confident in Orglis and Rams being the top two teams. I honestly did going into this weekend, and so I think that Cup 2 sort of went a little more as expected for me than Cup 1 in Europe anyway. So, what's your thoughts on that? Did you expect the results to stay the same from week 1, or do you expect the change or shift that it has changed to?
I mean, the results weren't all that dissimilar from week one, really. We had
Yeah,
three of the top four teams from week one featuring again in the top four. This time, you kind of Singularity fell to top six, and Obtained, who were previously top eight in Cup one, they moved into the top four for Cup two, and that wasn't a huge surprise to me because I think I'd seen some of Obtained's kind of gameplay, and I think they've got some really talented players on that roster, and I think they're a bit of a kind of a dark horse in the European scene. They were giving really close. I watched them play against Singularity. A lot of these games in Europe came down to kind of game fives. There was some really close series. Rams against August was a super close series. Obtained against Singularity. A lot of the time, even the S&Ds game fives were coming down to like your round 10s, round 11s, and often the difference makers was kind of your impact players such as like Nasty or Maple, who with the boomstick or the sniper have the ability to kind of make first bloods and first picks and transfer that into advantages. So I think definitely Obtained. I was quite impressed with. I think they could have gone deeper. They just kind of lost some close games. And often between these teams, when teams are evenly matched, when control at the minute is very defensive favored. So I think often it comes down to the round five, and it's whoever gets defense, right? Whoever outslays
yeah,
gets defense. So that, and it's such a swing mode because it's game three. So I think I think my overall impressions from Europe is that it's very top heavy. The top five, six teams are very competitive, and I think we're going to see them kind of battle it out for supremacy. And I'm
yeah.
looking forward to seeing some of them in the scouting ground. So
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Top heavy is probably the word I'd use because we've seen the sort of level that the teams like Orgos and stuff have played at, and they look very good. They look like they're sort of Josh has got them together playing as a unit. And then we watch sort of just like you said in that sort of top 8, top 12 range. Then when you start to get down to that part, you're seeing more like singular pushes and a little less teamwork, and that's a thing that I probably would say to those guys that they need to improve a little on. It's visible to me anyway to see that there's a lack of communication first and foremost, and maybe they are talking a lot, but important communication like waiting up for each other and things like that, and actually small talking. I think that looks like it's missing at least from the outside. But for me, I think, like you said, I think it's pretty top heavy at the minute, but I do expect as the year to go on. This is the way it sort of is at the start of every COD, isn't it? It's you have uh, players that figure out the game at a lot of faster pace than you have other teams. So um, it's sort of there's always guys that are just figuring out the game a lot faster at the start, and then it evens out a little more as the meta starts to develop and whatnot. Um, so yeah, I think closing the thoughts on Europe. I think Orglis for me are the sort of best team at the minute. I think that it just comes down to the combination of what they've got. They've got Josh, who's that sort of experienced leader, who obviously was the coach of Paris Legion last season, or one of the coaches of Paris Legion, should I say? And then you've got Dave, who's sort of one of the best ARs in Europe historically, and then Vortex is another sort of. He's one of the most underrated SMGs for the fact that he's just always getting results, but never really gets any praise because he doesn't. He's not like the SMG that's going to drop a 1.2. He'll make the right plays and he'll communicate well. If you listen to his comms, if you look at the decisions he makes, he's a smart player and he's communicating efficiently with his team, which allows players like Dave and Nasty to go off. And that's what they've got. They've got a good combination of leadership, experience, and the talent in there to balance it well off. And that's why I think that for me, Orglis are the best EU challengers team at the minute. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously there's other teams in there that definitely deserve a mention, but for me, I think that they're at the top right now.
yeah, I mean for me, I think you could give it to one of Singularity, August, Hearth, or even the Rams are in there for me. I think for me, I maybe back Singularity to push up the rankings a bit. I think they've slightly underperformed, if anything, and I expect them to get a bit better. So, but yeah, I'm excited to see how the European kind of dynamic continues to play out.
Yeah, true. I think Singularity have the right pieces. If you look at their team, the way it's composed, I think that it makes sense, and they've got a good coach there as well, and DeReal, who is sort of a very experienced player within the Call of Duty space. He's been about for a while, and a very well-spoken guy. And I'm sure he's got them playing some nice Call of Duty. Like you said, they've sort of underperformed our expectations, but I do expect them to have a bit more of a showing going forward. Going into the sort of NA season, I think it was a little less readable in terms of who's going to do well. There's a lot of good teams, but a lot of teams sort of, I'd say, sort of perform better on the more, like the last COD, for example, Modern Warfare. You have teams full of like a bunch of talented players, maybe not working as well as you do with a teams with a well-rounded team. Like we look at the European top-heavy teams, and we're saying it's very well-rounded, but then you look at the um, sort of NA teams, and I'd say there's a lot more teams with like talent heavy squads that maybe haven't been performing as well. And I think that's why you've seen the same team winning the both NA Challengers Cups, a very well rounded squad. And Gravity, Venom, Zaptius, and Paul X, who've been pretty clinical through both, and have been just getting a lot of praises. They're not only fans and whatnot, a lot of the other Challengers players as well respect that they are the best team in the NA Challengers at the minute. So I think that those guys are just obviously leaps and bounds above the rest currently. I think it's a bit more of a gap there at the top, because from what I understand, they're dominating teams in scrims. They obviously had that very successful cup. There wasn't a Challengers Cup, but where they played against Atlanta FaZe in the finals, took a map off them. That was when Atlanta FaZe were sort of on that 81-1 scrim record sort of thing. So that's when Atlanta FaZe were at their best. So I think that overall, sort of, like I said, the that team with Zaptius, Gravity, Venom, Paul X has been really performing pretty well. But when you're going through the rest, I think that one of the teams that I think has been a little underperforming has been the team of Kismet, GodRx, Panda, and Mox. All four players that played in the Pro League last season, and a lot of experience there, as well as a lot of talent in there. So you'd expect them to do a little better than what they've done. Um, and then I guess going through it all, you've got teams like uh, sort of, I guess, the LAG Academy guys, they were looking week one, they were looking fantastic on hardpoint. Um, I don't know what's your thoughts on their hardpoint in comparison to their other game modes, maybe.
I mean, yeah, I think we met. I talked to you about this, but I saw LAG Academy, and every time I seemed to tune in, they were putting teams in like the 50-point club, the 100-point club in hardpoint. So that was super impressive. Unfortunately, week two, I don't think they were able to replicate the same kind of performance. I think they dropped to a top 32 placement. But I think they've definitely got some talents on that team. Obviously, the likes of Mental, who's coming over from Gears of War, and he is obviously super successful on that franchise. I think in terms of NA as a whole, I think like we talked about Europe being top heavy, I think NA is far more open in terms of there's far more strength in depth. And I think the kind of the CDL moving to kind of 4v4 has kind of made the kind of amateur scene even more kind of in strength in depth than previous. Really, there's just so many teams that you look at their rosters and you think that they can make a run. Obviously, as you've already touched on, Westar, Tom Gravity, Venom, but Zaptius, Paul X, by far the standouts, and that wasn't unexpected because they in the Ferro Memorial Tournament they got to the final, defeating I believe Minnesota Rocker, Florida Mutineers, and then they even were giving FaZe a run for their money in the finals. So that I kind of expected them to be the standout AM team at the minute. But in terms of other teams that have impressed me, really the consistent performers. So I think the team
HYXR.
of yes, yeah. So that I was going to mention them. There's two teams really on my mind. Is HYXR with Zinx, Pentagram, Spoof, and Stamino. I think they're looking really good, and they've had two. I think they play second and third, so they've had two back-to-back top three placements,
Third and
which
then
is really
second. It keeps second this one, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then also the other one is brother Mo. You know, Mayhem was on our team last season. He's put together a good roster of himself. Emru is Spart and Glowfrosty, and they placed second in the first one, and then they placed top 6 at this one. So that, and that's like no like achievement. That is a tough feat with the strength and depth that we see in NA to pull that off. And I think one thing that stood out to me is that the teams that are doing well seem to be the ones that are kind of sticking together, if that makes sense, which kind of leads into the point that you made before about the teams. This game is a lot of teamwork, and the teams that have their stuff down and their synergies on point and their gap filling, etc., they seems to be the one that are doing well. Whereas a couple of teams broke up after Cup One and kind of made a new team, or like people moved around some teams, and those teams seem to struggle a bit. Like there's a bit more inconsistency. So I think it definitely shows that kind of getting your teamwork down and everything is really the way to go at the minute on this game.
Yeah, that's why I think the more balanced teams are the sort of best teams at the minute, because I think that if you look at the last couple of years, a lot of teams would just stack their squads with talent just due to the way the games were played, very fast paced, very up in your face aggression, and obviously that individual play style is going to shine through there. Whereas this game is more slow paced, methodical, teamwork based. So that's why I think you're seeing these more sort of slower paced, maybe more well rounded squads perform better. Like talking about HYXR, I think coming into this season, I think if you look at the other teams, um, like Paul X, Zaptes, Gravity, Venom, they had success last year. Those players had success. I think you've seen success from the likes of Spoof, Stamino, Pentagram, and Zinx on HYXR before. But for me, I didn't expect them to be as good as what they are coming in, just before the game had even been played. But now the way the game's developed, and I've seen the likes of Spoof, the way he's been performing, who's statistically not usually a kind of like top performer, but he on this game has been. I've seen a lot of great games from him, 50s, big S&Ds overall, and I think that they've got a good balance there too. Pentagram, obviously, we played quite a bit last season in S&D practice, with UIU being one of our sort of go-to teams to play Search and Destroy against. So we know, and Zinx too. So you know those guys have like a good team for Search and Destroy as well. So um, I think coming in, I wasn't expecting them to be good, but now like seeing the way the game's played and seeing how those individuals are playing on this game, it's sort of expected now that going forward into future Challengers Cups that they're going to be one of those teams that's going to be in there contending at the bitter end of the tournament. I guess apart from those sort of teams that we mentioned, I think that there's obviously sort of weird teams as well, like pickup squads like you had in the week one. You had Aches Classic, obviously Nick, who we know from last season, Saints and Karma, who that's obviously a team of 4 like Call of Duty legends. They got top 6 in the first cup, which is obviously a very good result. I think that, like we said, NA is a very tough, very well stretched out, sort of well rounded group over there. So I think that uh, those guys getting top 6 was a great result considering their lack of practice as a team. But look, like going back to the point I made before, I think that this game just suits that sort of more methodical, teamwork based thing with it. They obviously have got an abundance of, they've got probably about 30 years of COD experience in there if you combine them all together. So it's definitely, and a lot of championships as well. So I didn't expect them to do as well as what they did. But then again, like I said, the previous about HYXR, seeing how the game's now played out, it's makes complete sense for me. Another guess team we can talk about is the team of Parasite, Blast, Decimate, and Neptune from the first week. But I'd like to get a little bit into that because I know we obviously watched a little bit of them last weekend. That whole roster's obviously now blown up. What was your thoughts on their first week? And I honestly thought that they were one of the most talented teams, and then they've now just sort of they dropped Parasite, and obviously it's now a little different. What's your thoughts on them?
Yeah, so like you say, they're an extremely talented team. Obviously, Parasite himself brings a lot of pedigree and experience to that team. I think that's just an example of what we were talking about in terms of the teams that have stuck together are seeing more success, because they obviously Parasite broke off from that team, went and formed another kind of pickup team for the second event, and had objectively less success. And similarly, they replaced Parasite with another huge talent from 100 Thieves, Draza, or LA Thieves, should I say? And he's currently a substitute for that CDL team. And I think they dropped from 4th to top 8, which kind of speaks to how much depth there is really in the league at the minute, or in the challenger scene. I think it's just a really interesting dynamic of up and coming young talent and kind of storied legends of the COD scene that are kind of former pros. Really, you would consider them pros, but it's just an interesting dynamic of how it's unfolding. Really, it's just so competitive, and there's so many different teams that can make runs. Another team that I kind of wanted to look at was Sicario. I think they had a really strong showing Cup 1 with the top 8 finish, and then moving to the second cup, they struggled to replicate that performance. Top 32. So like I say, a lot of teams can beat a lot of teams, and this game is a lot of teamwork and kind of fine margins really determine games. So
I
yeah,
think that's one
it's
thing.
interesting.
I think that's one thing that the sort of challengers teams need to realize, that this isn't Modern Warfare. This isn't any of the last couple of games. And if we go back to like sort of when we were competing, you wouldn't see as many team changes as you have in the last couple of years in challengers. You constantly were seeing just changes after every tournament or every couple of weeks. Bad scrim, you change teams. I think at Call of Duty at its roots, when it's like this more slower paced teamwork based COD, I think that's when you have the advantage to those teams that get those extra reps in, because it's down to those like minuscule little things, like you said, setups, communication, the way you gel together as a team, and all these things are massively important. So that's why last year I think you could see a random pickup team just getting smashed together for a Challengers Cup and they could win it. But I don't think we're gonna see that this year, just due to the way the game is. You need to have your everything, your teamwork down, to be sort of more broad. You just need to have sort of all those intangible aspects of the game down, and I think that's what the guys of Paul X, Zaptius, Gravity, and Venom, Westar have done well. During each day of the 2021 Call of Duty Challengers Scouting Series, each franchise will draft players, so it'll be every single day. A new team will be drafted. This will allow the coaches of all the franchises to get a good variety of players to assess, and really, and even if you want to, you can repick the same players. You know, it's obviously if there's a player that performs really well and you're in a different order in the draft, then you might not get that player again. But overall, the way it works is essentially it's a draft each day, and this just allows the franchises to get a good variety of players to assess, and also allows the players to play amongst different groups and sort of really showcase their talents, because you might see one guy that's stuck within a roster that he doesn't particularly play well with, and he gets an opportunity the next day with a different one that's more sort of plays towards his play style, and that may allow that player to shine. So I think it's good that we're not just doing one draft and that's it for the whole time, and it's going to give that sort of variety, which I think is important at this stage in the game. The league will be providing things like scouting reports to the organisations, which will give them sort of intel on what to make decisions going forward into the next day, as well as sort of allowing teams to assess who maybe they want to sign, if there's teams that are sort of at this position now going to sign any of these players that they potentially draft. So it's a good opportunity there too for teams that are maybe looking for that substitute player that they've not yet signed yet, because I'm pretty sure the majority of franchises now have already announced or maybe all have announced their starting fours, but it's obviously, at this point, it's some teams just need to figure out that fifth guy. So I think this is a really good opportunity for a lot of those franchises who have yet to get that guy, or potentially want to build out a full academy system to do that. All right, Ryan, let's go through our hypothetical first picks in each role within NA and EU. We'll start off with NA first, and we'll start off with the AR position. You know, that was the position that I used to run pretty well. So we might as well start off with that, you know. For me, I think it's kind of undeniable, just, you know, looking across the ARs, especially if you're factoring in last year too. A really underrated player who sort of doesn't get much credit at all ever, to be honest, and it's Tom Gravity. I think that he's been consistently a core member of the most successful amateur NA teams for the last probably 3 years now, including Black Ops 4, because he was part of the squads that brought in ASIM and whatnot and Celium, etc. So he's been deeply involved with not only nurturing new talent but having success within the amateur scene, and obviously he's continued to do that this season. 2 first places, playing consistently well too. So for me, it's Tom Gravy, and then I'd maybe give a little mention to Sells, because I think last year I really did like him as a AR player, and I thought he was very good with the sniper as well. So he brings in that extra bit of to his game that I believe Tom doesn't have. But what's your thoughts on that? Similar thoughts, or you got any different names?
So no, I definitely think Tom Gravity is a really good pick. Obviously, part of the West Star team that have had so much success. For me, I think I'm gonna give the go to Glow Frosty, who has placed top 6 in back-to-back NA Challenger tournaments. I think he pulled off a second place in the first tournament, and then followed up with a solid top 6 placement. I think he has a lot of experience from the Modern Warfare season, and I think he started this year off super strong. I think for my sleeper pick, AR position, I'm gonna give the nod to Nightmare on Sicario. I think they had a pretty good showing in the first cup. I think they had a top 4 placement in the Challengers Championship last season, and I think they're one to watch moving forward. So I think he could be a kind of a sleeper AR pick as well.
Solid shout, solid shouts. I'm gonna move swiftly on to the SMG. So um, I'll let you start off with the SMG because that was your sort of expertise, I guess. Who would you have as your SMG picks?
So I think again, it's hard to look past West Star, given they've pulled off back-to-back gold medals in the Challenger Cup. So for me, I think the player I've been most impressed with on that roster is Venom. I think he's been super consistent in every mode. He's always doing well. He just makes his decision making is super solid, and I've just been super impressed with him. To be honest, I think I could easily give it to Zaptius, but I think for me, I'm going to give it to Venom.
Yeah, I think Venom's probably the most talented, I'd say, in the SMG role. I'd say if you're comparing him and Zaptius. For me, I'm going to go Zaptius. I kind of want a more well-rounded. I know Venom's probably great, across the board. I've not seen as much of him as I have from Zaptius over the years. I know he's been sort of an S&D specialist for a number of years. Venom too sort of came through as well within that scene, but Zaptius for me got a bit more experience under his belt. And I feel like does a little more of the intangibles, etc., within this team. So I think Zaptius deserves a mention. But there are a couple of guys as well. Stamino. Stamino has been performing very well this season. Sort of going under the radar, getting decent little finishes here or there. Obviously, their squad finished third and then second. So good results, but not what I expected. And he's that guy that does the dirty work. So I think he definitely deserves some credit, as well as Mayhem too. He obviously was part of our roster last season, and I think this year, if we, from what we've seen of Mayhem and from what we know of Brother Mo, he is a very smart, methodical based player, and I think that this game does really suit his play style. So I think that it is tailor made towards him. So we're obviously seeing him sort of progress within up in the ranks in amateur space again. And he, even before we signed him last season and going back in previous years before that, he was having a lot of success within the amateur space. So I'd expect something similar again. I think you need a player like Mayhem, like a Stamino, like that guy who'll just do whatever it takes to win, but can also perform well when it matters most. So that's it for me for the SMGs, and then I guess we'll move into the flex role. To pick, this is the flex is a little more interesting because you can get sort of more AR sided flexes or more SMG sided flexes. But um, for me, I think I would probably look at the likes of Spoof. To be honest, I think he's obviously came in, had a very solid start to the season. Sort of not renowned to be the most flashy, great player, but he deserves a lot of credit for what he's done so far. So special shout out to Spoof. I think I've seen him perform very well in both respawn and S&D. Big numbers, 50s and respawns and high numbers in S&D. I know he was actually suffering with COVID for the first cup as well, so he's obviously went through the trenches there and performed very well. So for me, Spoof and another honourable mention to probably actually, to be honest, I'm just gonna pick, I was gonna say Zinks, an honourable mention to Zinks, but I'm going hard on my Spoof pick because I think he deserves it. Locking in Spoof, no other honourable mentions.
Well, honestly, you've stolen my pick. I had Spoof lined up, so we're in agreement. I think Spoof's been super impressive. Again, they've pulled off two top three finishes back to back. So I think he started off the season super strong. So I think we can expect to see him in the draft, and I'm excited to see what he can do.
For sure. And then, like, to round off the team, I guess we need a sort of captain figure. They get that. This can be within any role, to be honest. You need that guy who, obviously, you're going to need to combo them with the right pieces, but who's going to lead the line, communicate at the highest level, and sort of command the troops almost. I think for me, you have to probably look at a little more experience here within NA. I think for me, honestly, someone that gets a lot of sort of hate throughout the season, I think, and it's just due to the sort of way I guess he puts himself about. But a very underrated sort of leadership figure, I believe, is Parasite. I think for years he's sort of not been in the best positions for whatever reason that may be. It could be that he's rubbed someone the wrong way and they just don't want them in the roster. And you've obviously seen what's happened with the roster with Blast, etc. this season. And honestly, maybe that's a kind of red flag. Maybe you don't pick him as your leader, but I do think when he's surrounded by that sort of younger talent, that he is able to mold those guys. He's had a lot of success with the last couple of seasons when he's been surrounded by younger talent. I think the frustrations usually typically lie within sort of the more him clashing heads with the more experienced guys. So if I'm building a team with him in it, I'm kind of limiting the amount of experienced players you're having in there. But I think Parasite's a very smart player, knows what he's talking about, and really does communicate well. So for me, Parasite is my choice. How about you?
Yeah. So continuing on the experience theme, like you say, Parasite, former world champion. My pick is actually gonna go to another former world champion, legend, two-time world champion. I'm gonna give the nod to Patrick Price, Aches. I think in terms of leadership, no one's got kind of a more accomplished record. I think he's one of those players that we've got some young blood in here, some up and coming talents, and then we've got just absolute legends of the scene that are also rocking about. So I think Aches is just a solid pick, and I think I'm excited to see what he can do. He's had some good success in this game already. Top 6 placement in the first cup, followed it up with a top 16 placement in the second cup, I believe, under leverage. So yeah, I'm going to give it to Aches. That's my pick for my experienced leader to lead some of the young guns.
Sounds good. I think that's a well-rounded roster from both of us. To be fair, there's to us in NA. There's so many great players, and obviously we're gonna get to see that over the next couple of days. Obviously, Europe's kind of where we're from, of course, so we have a little more knowledge of maybe the sort of personal uh, attributes of some of the players. We know a little more about some of them we've teamed with previously in actual squads when we were competitors. So I think that there's definitely a little more knowledge there from me from on some players. So getting right back into it, I think we'll start off at the top again, starting off in that AR role. For me, I think it's hard to go anywhere but towards Dave. I think that he's been a consistent top player for a number of years, and obviously had a lot of success in the past. So looking at the sort of AR competition within Europe, Dave was at an elite level AR worldwide at one stage, and on this game, if you sort of look at the way it plays, you feel like it would play in towards his hands, and obviously they've obviously had success towards the start with the first couple of cups, and obviously winning the last one. So I think that Dave for me is the easy choice. He's probably the best main AR within the European AM space, and you could obviously make the argument that he would be a top AR within the sort of worldwide landscape as well. I think that he's that good. So Dave is the choice for me.
It's a great choice. I'm actually going to give the nod to Gizmo on House Tarth. So I think they started off the year super hot. They came out with the first place in the first Challenger Cup. I've been pretty impressed with Gizmo. I see he's been running the XM4, which is kind of a niche like AR pick. It's quite interesting to see, and I think he's been super impressive so far. So yeah, that's going to be my pick. I think you could easily give it to Maple as well on Singularity, but I think I'm going to give the nod to Gizmo.
Yeah, I think Maple's probably like an honorable mention, definitely due to his success with SNG last year. You definitely need to throw him in there, as well as maybe someone like Whalers. But apart from that, looking across the sort of the landscape of ARs within Europe, I think it goes pretty downhill after that, to be quite honest. I mean, to be fair, you've got players like Madcat, etc., who typically would be that main AR player, but doesn't actually play that role on this game. So, like, I would definitely throw Madcat in the mix also, but like I said, he's not playing that slow paced AR on this game, so we'll remove him from that. But historically, very good AR. Moving on to the SMG role, this is where I feel like Europe has its strength in the SMG role. To be honest, currently there's a bunch of good young players coming through and a bunch of experienced SMGs as well. So I think it's quite a hard choice really. If you're building a team, this is the position where you really need to think about, all right, am I going to have the sort of more experienced veteran being this sort of main sub player, or am I going to throw in a really talented young explosive SMG? For me, I'm going to go with Afro. He's obviously first and third in the first two cups, had a lot of success towards the tail end of last year. Um, has consistently put up big numbers as an SMG, which hasn't really looked too possible from the way this game is played out. I think it's a little more AR heavy, so the fact that he's been able to statistically perform as well as he has and continue to sort of go up the ranks is impressive to say the least. So I think he's probably the most explosive SMG for me. So I'd have him in the roster every day, all day. And then yeah, what's your thoughts?
Solid pick. I think I'm going to give it to his SMG partner in crime, actually, Defrag. So I think I've been super impressed with Defrag. They've obviously the team's performing super well. I want to give an honorable mention to Detain on Singularity. I think he's been a super solid player for years now. But I think I'm going to give it to Defrag, and also my sleeper pick in this role is Callum of Obtained. I think he's been super impressive on a solid team so far. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do as well.
Yeah, Callum's a great shout. To be fair, we've seen him in those scrims the other day when they were going up against our sort of pickup team that was going into the Challengers tournament, and he was performing well. I think he, from just seeing his movements on the map, etc., he seemed to be a very methodical player, but also one that can pick up kills. So I think it's a decent shout. And yeah, I think for me, those are all solid choices. I think the Afro and Defrag both complement each other, so I think it's definitely worthwhile mentioning both of those guys. Going into the flex and then the captain role, I think flex for me it's an interesting one because I'm probably gonna go with bids, uh, and I know that was probably going to be your pick. In fact, no, I'm not. I'm gonna go nasty
Stealing my
because
picks here.
yeah, nasty is going to be my pick because I think he is another very We're going for pure explosions here. Nasty is another very explosive player who can sort of be that guy that plays at an extremely elite level, slaying wise. So, um, consistently over obviously due last season he was signed for London, had issues there where he couldn't get across to the States and play there, but we might have seen him in the London starting lineup last year. And then my cat has just walked into shop. Fantastic stuff. Jesus. Hold on. I'm going to have to do that again. I'm going to have to start again. Now, oh my God. Go away. Move out the way. Right. And now we're going into the flex and sort of captain roles within the rosters. For me, I think Nasty. He's just the most explosive player on the list, I believe. And obviously, looking back to last season, you had opportunities for him with the London franchise where they obviously had issues getting him out to America, so he wasn't able to compete with them. But throughout the whole of last season in challengers, throughout the season before that in I guess whatever it was called back then, the amateur space. He is consistently performed very well, and I think it's only a matter of time before he gets his opportunity with the top pro team. So for me, Nasty is just sort of chapping on the door, waiting to go, and that's why I would go with him.
It's a good pick. I'm going to go with his opposite number on Team Singularity, Bids. So I think we used to, from Modern Warfare, we used to seeing Bids with an SMG in his hands, but I think now on this game, certainly I've seen him run a naughty flex. So I think he's had that Krig in his hands consistently in some games, and he's been doing really well. And obviously the team, I think maybe slightly underperformed so far in the two cups, but I mean they're still there or thereabouts, and they're giving the kind of the top two teams so far in Tarth and former Team War some close games. So I think we can expect some more success from that Singularity roster. I think Bids has really stepped up to fill that that flex role so far. So I think he's definitely one to watch for the scouting series.
And then your captain, Ryan, who you closing out your squad with? Who's that guy for the squad?
So for me, again, we're looking to experience for the captain. I think if you ask any European player, he's one of the smartest players that the European scene's ever produced. Understands COD on a very high level, and it's going to be Joe for me. Obviously, former coach of the London Royal Ravens, now back playing. I think Joe can provide that experience. He can make those plays to, break hills and all that stuff, and direct the troops on the floor, on the ground. So I'm giving it to Joe.
Good choice. I think that would probably be my choice too. But I think Vortex is another good shout. I think he is definitely graduated from the B Sports School of COD. I think obviously for years and years he had that sort of leadership figure in Josh behind him, and now he's continued to progress within the amateur scene, I guess. But he's obviously been a pro player, but he's continued to improve as his years have gone on, and I think he's now a very experienced player that can lead the line for a squad. Obviously now they've got Josh back in with him, so maybe he doesn't need to do that as much. But for me, I think that listen to Vortex's comms and what he brings to the table. I think that he has a solid leadership figure, especially within the European amateur space currently. And I'd certainly respect if I was a player playing under him, his opinion on the game, because he is a very smart player when it comes to the sort of little things within Call of Duty. So for me, that's how I'm rounding out the squad. In the end, this scouting series is massively important for not only the franchises to assess the best players, but also those young amateur players to get that spotlight. I think overall, the thing that I want the amateur players to remember first and foremost is you need to think about the intangibles in this game, and being a good teammate. I think first and foremost that's going to allow you to get the opportunities here in the CDL. I think that chopping and changing teammates every single weekend is not going to provide you success. So I'd like to, I guess, say a little message to amateur players. Figure out what obviously you've got to figure out your team first and foremost. But once you do, you're going to have some ups and downs. You need to work through things together as a team, and that's the way you're going to have a successful season. So for me, I think that the amateur players just need to focus on that. In conclusion, I think that if you look across the board in both Europe and NA, it is very sort of well-rounded. There's a lot of teams up there in both sort of sides that can perform at the highest level. And I think what's going to separate the best from the worst is just focusing on that teamwork aspect and really, really trying to be the best teammate you can be. And I think that in Europe in particular, there's really no difference at the top there. You've got different tournaments going on, and it's pretty much a different winner each and every time. So you've got a real opportunity there for a lot of the teams to stick out, figure out how to play, and grind through and become a more consistent force. In NA, it's all just about those teams catching up to Wester at the minute, and I think that, like we've touched on, there's from second to top 32, you can probably see shifts there across the board, like in terms of positions as the season goes on. So just if you're coming top 32 in these first couple cups, don't worry about it. Focus on the next one. And I think that's the sort of main thing I'd like to say to all the amateurs out there. What about
Yeah.
you, Ryan? What's
Yeah.
your thought?
Overall, I'm just excited to see some top level talent coming into the scouting series. You know, like obviously we know we're going to see some super mechanically gifted players. We're going to get some insights into how they communicate between each other, kind of seeing players' natural game sense on like a first-hand perspective of it. And so, like you say, NA full of talent, depth everywhere. Europe, maybe fewer teams, but definitely the kind of the people in that top 8 are superb teams and prospects. So I think moving forward, I think it's going to be an awesome event, and I'm pretty excited to just get involved and see some of the players.
And that's it for the 2021 Scouting Series with Toronto Ultra. I hope you all have a great day, and I hope you continue to watch throughout this week. It's going to be a great opportunity for the amateur players to get a spotlight, and a good opportunity for the franchises to assess who that next Call of Duty professional player is going to be. Goodbye.